Rupesh Kumar. The 5th, we have Dana and Rich, Poppy C, and Kartik. Oh, you spotlighted, so now I lost my place. Prema Vinodini and Henry and Pink Yogi of Harlem. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us. And today, as we said, we have our dear Vasudev Das Prabhu giving class today, and you're spotlighted, and we're live streaming Vasudev Prabhu, so you are set to start whenever you feel comfortable. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Such a pleasure to be with you. Actually, I'm with you almost every morning, although you don't see me because I'm on the altar so often. So very often I'm sitting and listening. So very grateful always to this Sangha for this daily upliftment. So we'll start with singing Radha Madhava for just a couple minutes. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Shodanandana Brajajanaranjana Shodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I'd like to request the blessings of all the devotees to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam today. And we're starting a new chapter. We have heard in the last chapter how Krishna spoke in such a way as to make the coward, as to make Indra angry and to divert the attention of the coward men headed by Nanda Maharaj from the yajna to be performed to Indra. He diverted that to worshipping Govardhan hill and worshipping the cows and worshipping the Brahmanas, and especially the worship of Govardhan hill. And this to reciprocate with the coward men, Krishna, in the end, he appeared in this wonderful form, accepting and eating all the offerings made by the cowherd men, and declared, I am the hill, I am Govardhan. And in this way, he established the identity of himself in Govardhan hill. And as we heard from Champaka, that's why devotees, they worship rocks and pebbles of Govardhan hill, just as deities in the temple. I had the good fortune to live in Govardhan for a number of months in 2001, 2002, more than 20 years ago. I was serving as a brahmachari in the temple in Amsterdam, doing various services. And I was a little burnt. And my spiritual master, who was just my mentor at the time, His Holiness Kadamba Swami, he sent me to Govardhan, or he suggested I go to Govardhan to study Sanskrit, because I have a background in classical languages. So suddenly I found myself there in Govardhan, studying Sanskrit with Gopi Purananand Prabhu, the devotee who did a lot of the translation together with Hridayananda Maharaj of these verses we are reading. He was a very great Vaishnava, extremely learned. But they say when somebody is very learned, like a tree with heavy fruits, starts to bow down. So he was he's very humble, very kind, very respectful always. Like, he's known for that. I think he was always like, you just couldn't find any trace of ego in him at all. Although he was one of the most learned people in our whole movement. So it was such a fortune for me to be with him for those months. Every day I would come to his home. I would do my Sanskrit lessons and present it to him, would look after them. Every day I would go to his home and I would hear Bhagavatam from him together with his wife and his little son. And whoever else would come up, like he would speak for 20, 30 minutes, just as part of the family routine. So that was such a joyful time and such a foundational time for me in my spiritual life. So ever since then, Govardhan is very, very dear to me. I feel always when I'm in Govardhan, that's my home. And everywhere else I live, that's, kind of, I live there, but Govardhan is where I belong since those days. It's such a beautiful place. There's nothing else to do but worshiping of Krishna and circumambulating the hill. It just naturally draws out your devotion. And there's so many vivid instances of just looking at Govardhan and just feeling the presence of Krishna, just feeling that transcendental presence of that hill. It's not an ordinary place. It feels like spiritually vibrant, especially when you go into deep sadhana. You feel the spiritual vibrancy of that place, and that hill is alive. It's a spiritual personality who reciprocates with you, who answers your prayers, who cares for you. So it's therefore all the Vaishnavas in our tradition, the great acharyas, they always pray for the shelter of Govardhan Hill. They always aspire to live at Govardhan, because that's the heart of Vrindavan, is Govardhan Hill, as Rupa Goswami says, because Krishna's most intimate pastimes take place in Govardhan Hill. With the cowherd boys, he has so many pastimes there in the caves, and he herds cows with them over the slopes, and he eats lunch sometimes on the slabs of Govardhan Hill. And then, of course, so many pastimes with the gopis. Radhakund, Shamakund is part of the Govardhan area. There's Manasi Ganga, beautiful lake, where Krishna has boat pastimes with the gopis. The whole place is just enriched with beautiful leelas of Krishna. And central of that leela, of course, is one of the central leelas is the lifting of the hill, which we're going to hear about now in this chapter. Lord Krishna lifts Govardhan Hill. And it's such an iconic pastime. It's what would Krishna be without being the lifter of Govardhan Hill? You can't separate these two. Giri Varadhari, he's the lifter of Govardhan Hill. It's Krishna. It's such a iconic pastime of Vrindavan, Krishna's Braja Leela, where he calls all his associates, all the cows and all the animals, all the residents, all the gopas, the gopis, the elder ones, the younger ones, everyone comes together and is with Krishna. And just looking at Krishna for 7 days and 7 nights, I feel the greatest joy being in his presence. So Krishna holding up that hill, it's Krishna saying to us, I'm here for you. I'm your caretaker. I'm your protector. I'm your beloved. And even if the most powerful personality of the universe wants to do something to you, I'm here to protect you. So you don't have to take shelter of anyone else. but me. That is what Krishna is saying when he stands there. That's what we can meditate upon. There's some beautiful deities also of Krishna in that form of lifting Govardhan hill. Very famous deity Srinathi ji. Gopal, in our tradition, is more better known as Gopal Nathji, who is now worshipped in Nathadwar in Gujarat. But originally, or is it? I think it's Rajasthan. I'm not sure. I think Rajasthan. But originally, he was worshipped in Govardhan Hill. It's a beautiful deity with a form of lifting the hill. And then there's Harideva. When I was living in Govardhan, I was living very close to this deity of Harideva. He's in the heart of Govardhan, next to the Manasi Ganga, which is a lake in the middle right of Govardhan. And it's also a beautiful deity of Krishna lifting the hill. So when we see this form, this very iconic form, that's what we can think. It's Krishna's telling us, I'm your protector, I'm your maintainer. Take shelter of me, you don't have to worry about anything else. So that's what we're going to hear about in this chapter. So we'll read the chapter summary. Lord Krishna lifts Govardhan hill. This chapter describes how Lord Indra was overcome by anger when the residents of Vraja canceled his sacrifice, how he tried to punish them by sending forth a devastating rainfall to Vrindavan, and how Lord Krishna protected Gokula by lifting Govardhan hill and for 7 days using it as an umbrella to ward off the rain. Indra, angered at the disruption of the sacrifice meant for him and falsely presuming himself the supreme controller, said, quote, people often give up the pursuit of transcendental knowledge, the means for self-realization, and imagine that they can cross over the ocean of material existence by mundane fruitive sacrifices. Similarly, this coward men have become intoxicated by pride and have offended me by taking shelter of an ignorant, ordinary child. Krishna, unquote. To remove this supposed pride of the residents of Vrindavan, Indra sent the clowns known as Samvartaka, whose function is to facilitate the destruction of the world. He sent them to harass the Vrajavasis with downpours of rain and hail. The coward community was very disturbed by this and approached Krishna for shelter. Understanding that this trouble was the work of Indra, Krishna decided to smash them to pieces Indra's false prestige, and thus he lifted Govardhan hill with one hand. He then invited the entire coward community to take shelter in the dry space beneath the mountain. For 7 successive days, he held up the hill until Indra finally understood Krishna's mystic power and ordered the clouds to withdraw. When the coward villagers emerged from beneath the mountain, Krishna put Govardhan hill back in its proper place. It's actually said that Krishna put him exactly on the millimeter back where the hill belonged, and not a blade of grass was affected by all the storms and all the devastation Indra tried to cause. The cowards were in ecstasy, showing loving symptoms such as flowing tears and bodily hair standing on end. They embraced Krishna and offered him benediction according to their respective positions, while the demigods in heaven rained down flowers and sang the Lord's praises. So text 1. Shri Shukavacha Indrastadatmana pujam Vigyaya vihitam nripa Gopebhya Krishnanatebhyo Nandadhibhyaschukopaha. Shukadev Goswami said, my dear King Parikshit, when Indra understood that his sacrifice had been put aside, he became furious with Nanda Maharaj and the other coward men who were accepting Krishna as their Lord. Purport. At the very beginning of this chapter, Shukadev Goswami reveals the foolishness of Indra and the absurdity of his anger. Indra was frustrated because the residents of Vrindavan accepted Sri Krishna as their Lord, but the simple fact is that Sri Krishna is the Lord, not only of the residents of Vrindavan, but of all that exists, including Indra himself. Thus Indra's petulant reaction was ridiculous. As the common saying goes, pride goes before the fall. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajata Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishakam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Vyayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. So it's said here that Indra, tada at that time, Atmana Pujam Vigyaya Vihitam, understanding that his own puja had been Vihitam, stopped or diverted. Chukopaha, he became angry. At whom? To whom was his anger directed? Gopebhya, to the cowherds, Nandadibhya, headed by Nanda Maharaj. And then the cowherd man is described as Krishnanatebhya. So the word Krishnanata refers to those who have accepted Krishna as their Lord. That's the meaning of that term, Krishnanata. Beautiful word. Could be a name, a transcendental name for a devotee, Krishnanata. One who has Krishna as his Lord. So the acharyas say that by this one statement, the absurdity, the foolishness of Indra's anger is described, because that what was their fault? They accepted Krishna as their Lord. But that's a glory, of course. That's their glory. But Indra, misunderstanding the situation, became angry. And of course, many times, I can speak for myself, we misunderstand a certain situation and we become angry. In that sense, we can all relate to Indra very much. Indra, in a way, described as very human. Indra, of course, is a very great personality, being the Lord of the heavenly world. He's a very powerful personality. He's given a lot of power, a lot of control over the universe. But he's also not he's not the supreme. It's clearly also described in the Bhagavatam that Indra is a post. Indra is not an eternal position. Indra is a role. It's a post. He lives very long. He lives, as far as I recall, 1 manvantara. A day of Brahma is 1,000 of the 4 yuga cycles together. That's 1 day of Brahma. And that 1 day of Brahma is divided up in 14 periods of 72, what's called Divya Yuga, 72 cycles of ages. And every period has another Indra. Another personality becomes Indra every manvantara. So he lived for a very, very long time compared to human calculation. But it's a post, it's a role. It's not there's not such a thing as an eternal Indra, maybe except in the spiritual world. I'm not sure if there's an Indra also in Goloka Vrindavan, like a transcendental counterpart. I've never heard of that, but in the material world, it's a temporary position. So he's in that sense, he is one of us. He's a conditioned soul. But as a deva, as a god, as a very powerful god, he's an emblem of the mode of goodness. Rasanath and Ananda Vihari. Thank you for giving us your darshan. So, yeah, he's an emblem of the mode of goodness. But in the material world, the mode of goodness is still tainted by passion and ignorance. It's not pure goodness. So here we see a very strong taint coming out in the form of anger. Now, of course, anger is a natural emotion, and there's a place for that. Anger can serve. Anger often comes about from a certain dissatisfaction with a situation, and it can serve to rectify that situation when it's properly guided. Srila Prabhupada often became angry, and he used that anger because of a dissatisfaction with a certain situation. But it was not his own personal dissatisfaction, it was the dissatisfaction of Krishna not being served properly and his disciples not behaving properly. And then he used that anger to rectify them and rectify the situation. Or sometimes other people as well, or had certain misconceptions. But he had control over that anger. He was not under the control of that anger. So many people report how Prabhupada could very quickly switch that anger. So we have this beautiful example of transcendental anger. So it's a natural emotion. It's not that we're without it ever. But very often we become angry because we feel slighted ourselves. And we'll read more about it in the next verse. So, and then anger overcomes us, as what is happening with Indra right now. And that's a function of the mode of ignorance. And the mode of ignorance, and that's why pride so often deludes us, and anger deludes us, because the mode of ignorance twists everything around. In the mode of goodness, we can see things as we are. In the mode of passion, we're confused. And in the mode of ignorance, we see the one thing for exactly the opposite. That's the definition of illusion also, to see one thing for something else. So here, Indra's ignorance is very apparent. He sees something which is a glory as a fault. He sees the truth, the right thing to do, as something wrong. So next verse, Ganam samvartakam nama meghanam chantakarinam Indra prachodayat krudho vakyam chahesha manyuta. Angry Indra sent forth the clouds of universal destruction known as Samvastaka. Imagining himself the supreme controller, he spoke as follows. The word Ishamani here is very significant. Indra arrogantly considered himself to be the Lord, and this exhibited the typical attitude of a conditioned soul. Many thinkers in the 20th century have noted the exaggerated sense of individual prestige, characteristic of our culture. Indeed, writers have coined the phrase the me generation. Everyone in this world is more or less guilty of the syndrome called Ishamana, or proudly considering oneself the Lord. So we get a deeper insight in the cause of Indra's anger, his ignorant anger, his anger out of his folly. which is rooted in his ego, which is described here as Ishamani. He falsely considered himself Isha, the Lord. And Prabhupada says, he writes in the Krishna book, demoniacally, Indra thought himself to be the all-powerful Supreme Personality. When demons become very powerful, they defy the Supreme Controller, the personality of Godhead. Indra, though not a demon, was puffed up by his material position, and he wanted to challenge the Supreme Controller. He thought himself, at least for the time being, as powerful as Krishna. So this is he probably describes this as a demonic tendency. And Krishna also describes this in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna, he describes in the 16th chapter the divine and demonic natures. And he starts to impersonate. These are very interesting verses. He starts to impersonate how a demon thinks. And it starts with this famous line, Ishwaro aham bhogi, Sukhavan balavan sukhi. I don't actually know if it starts like that. I may be wrong there, but it's one of the, Ishwaraham, I am the controller, I am the Lord. Aham bhogi, and I am the enjoyer. Sukhavan, I am happy. Balavan sukhi, and I am powerful. So Indra here is acting very much like a demon, although Prabhupada points out he's of course not a demon. Now, what separates Indra from a demon? How can we understand that he's not a demon? Anyone has any idea, any thought here?
Could you restate the question, please, Vasudev?
So Indra, he's acting demonically by considering himself the controller. And so he's exhibiting like a demonic tendency, but he's not a demon. Now, how does he show himself to be ultimately not a demon?
In the Gita, in that same chapter, the divine nature, it says that that a demon does not know what is to be done. And Indra actually does know what's to be done. He's just not doing it. And ultimately, his pride is humbled. It's just that's a crack at answering your question. But I just always remember those verses. Says a demon doesn't know what is to be done, but Indra does, but he's just not doing it.
Yes, he does. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you, Jamunajaya. He knows what's to be done. He's temporarily bewildered, and so he goes out of line. He's humbled, but then also he comes to his senses and he humbles himself as a devotee, coming back to his senses. Now, demons, they do not do that. We hear the story of Jarasandha, who is defeated by Krishna. One time, comes back. Another time, comes back. Third time, comes back. So he's showing the demonic nature just doesn't learn the lesson, doesn't come to his senses. Kaliya, as we heard about, he also exhibited demonic tendencies, but he came to his senses and also therefore become a devotee, so much so that we have Krishna Kaliya temples, Krishna dancing on the hoods of Kaliya. So that is the difference, that a demon will never give up that sense of I am the Lord, I am the controller, and I will never submit.
Vasudev, I'm wondering if now would be appropriate, since you're kind of like on the topic, Hamangi, she wrote a question in the chat, said, Hare Krishna, wasn't Indra a devotee of Lord? Then how did he think himself as a supreme Lord?
Yes. So it said in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, Muhyanti yat surya, that even the great demigods are placed into illusion by Lord Krishna, by his illusory energy. So Indra is not a pure devotee. He's a mixed devotee. That means he still has material desires to control, to enjoy. And as a result of that, he's still affected by the modes of material nature, or the illusory energy. So a pure devotee is never overcome by illusion, never overcome by Maya. But those who are not pure, they can be overcome by Maya and placed in illusion. Now, Indra is a very big personality with a lot of power. And so his scope of being bewildered by that power is therefore also greater than just one of us who don't have so much power, even although we also get bewildered, and we get to that in a little bit. So yeah, he's a devotee, but he's not free from illusion. So when illusion overcomes us, we can do very stupid things. Yeah, when we become overcome by false ego specifically, we can act in very foolish ways. And really mistake one thing for another. So the root of his folly is described. He's considering himself Isha. He is Isha also. He is a lord. He is given a certain lordship, a certain area, a domain of control by the Lord. But now it's getting to his head. So much so that he wants to retaliate. And we can also relate to that. Anger comes within us as soon as we feel like disrespected or slighted in some way. And immediately anger comes, and immediately we want to vent that anger. That's the nature of anger. Prabhupada writes this in the Krishna book. He says, Indra became angry and he vented his anger upon the inhabitants of Vrindavan. So anger has that sense of, then it comes up, it immediately wants to express itself. And that's where we often go wrong. I'm sure we all have that experience where anger comes up and we just act up on it immediately. Like Indra is doing it immediately. Anger comes up immediately, he calls for those clouds and wants to vent his anger by acting in a destructive manner. And that's how anger vents itself. It wants to destroy. And that's why we have to be so careful of this emotion, because it can destroy. It can destroy relationships. It can destroy, it can destroy physical things. We can sometimes slam something, and especially as devotees, it can destroy our spiritual life when we offend Krishna or the Vaishnavas through our anger. So we have to be very, very careful when this comes up. So we see anger, and we hear also in the Gita how Indra considers himself the Lord. And with that sense of lordship also comes a sense of enjoyership. These two go hand in hand. That's why the Gita says, Ishvaraham aham bhogi. I'm the Lord, I'm the enjoyer. As soon as we consider ourselves the Lord, and also the spirit of enjoyment comes in. So Indra considers himself the enjoyer of this sacrifice and the enjoyer of this worship and this attention, praise, and so forth. So, but when anger, when that karma, that desire to enjoy is frustrated, then anger comes in. So that in that sense, lordship, enjoyment, when frustrated, very quickly leads to anger. Then we learn from the Gita what happens then. Krodha bhavati samoha. From anger, because it's ignorance, mode of ignorance, illusion arises. Samoham, complete illusion arises. One becomes bewildered, one cannot discriminate anymore. What's what? Samohat, smriti vibramaha. From bewildered from this bewilderment, one's memory becomes bewildered. One forgets things. One forgets Indra is forgetting Krishna is the Lord. And these inhabitants of Vrindavan are actually great personalities. He knew this. He was praying to Krishna in the womb just a few chapters ago. So he was bewildered very quickly. That can happen due to anger. We forget. And then because of that bewilderment of memory, then buddhinasha, the intelligence is lost. One cannot anymore discriminate what's right, what's wrong. As a matter of fact, one often acts in a way detrimental to one's own well-being and the well-being of others. And one acts in a foolish way because one cannot discriminate what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial. So this is a beautiful example of how what happens. It's a case study of those verses of the Bhagavad Gita. How from lust, anger arises, from anger, illusion, bewilderment of memory, and so forth. So Indra is therefore falling down from his exalted position. And he's also, we can see, he's overreacting. That so often happens when we become angry. Somebody slights us in some way. And then we overreact. We because of that bewilderment of the mode of ignorance due to anger, we don't see something for what it is. We often take like something very slight to be very significant, and therefore we overreact. Like, okay, Indra wasn't given his puja, but is it really necessary to call the clouds of, let's say even they made a mistake, right? Which is not the case, but even if they made a mistake, is it really necessary to call the clouds of universal devastation to destroy a tiny coward village in somewhere on the earth? So it's a clear overreaction. So that also very often happens when anger and ego get in the way. And then when that comes in, when false ego overtakes us, then very often we start to justify it. So that's the last verse. Oho Srimad Mahatmyam Gopanam Kananaukasam Krishna Marcham Upasricha Ye Chakru Deva Helanam. Indra said, just see how these cowherd men living in the forest have become so greatly intoxicated by their prosperity. Interestingly, again, the false ego and the illusion, it's like it mistakes. You point, like you have this statement, like you point one finger and three fingers point back at you, right? So Indra's saying they become greatly intoxicated by the prosperity. Actually, they're not at all, but he is intoxicated by his position, his prosperity, his wealth, his power, and so forth. So he's got it exactly wrong. They have surrendered to an ordinary human being, Krishna, and thus they have offended the gods. Of course, Indra was really saying that the coward men had offended him, Indra, by taking shelter of Krishna, whom Indra considered to be a marcha, a mortal. This was certainly a gross miscalculation on Indra's part. Vishwanath Chakravarti, he says that Saraswati also speaks here through Indra, saying that it's actually a glorification of the coward man. These are always a very, very nice, beautiful insights by the Acharyas, how the Bhagavatam is always glorifying Krishna. So, Oho Srimad Mahatmyam Gopanam Kananaukasam. Oh, the greatness, the Mahatmya, the glory, and the Shri, their splendor, and their Mada also means joy. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says, how amazing are the cowards' splendor, joy, and glory. Krishna Marcham, Krishnam Upasricha, having taken of shelter of Krishna, they showed contempt to me, to the Deva, to this God, to me, who's acting in such a wicked way, who's such a wicked personality. So they showed contempt towards me, exactly as they should have. And Marcham, he says, such Marcham is such contempt is beneficial for mortals. And when they take shelter of Krishna and show contempt to those who object to taking our shelter of Krishna, that is actually glorious. So many takeaway points are here. We always have to be careful with anger. We should not react upon our anger. Even angry comes as a natural emotion. We should be very cautious, not act upon it. Come to our senses and look at the situation for what it is. Often some counsel, someone else helps to see it. If Indra would just ask Brihaspati, for example, like, what do you think? He would have maybe gotten some insight. Often our ego mistakes one thing for another. We may be actually at fault, and we're seeing someone else being at fault. That's the illusion, to mistake something for something else. And it often happens where we have a domain of control. We all have some domain of control. Like, for example, I'm the head pujari. And I like to call myself the as pujari, because as stands for assistant of everyone else. I'm assisting everyone else in their service. So that's the proper mood. But if I think of myself as the head, and this is my domain of control, then very quickly ego comes in. And then, often that's where you go wrong. Because then you see something is not being done right, or something is out of line. And sometimes you have to correct. But because whenever we have a domain of control, we very quickly identify ourselves as the controller of that. And then we take something personal. So we mix in our own ego of being the controller and thinking, oh, I take it personally. And our ego, our anger get mixed in with our ego, and then we act in foolish ways. I've done it many times. My apologies to all the devotees who I ever offended. It's a learning process. But that's where we all have some domain of our control. Maybe our home, or maybe in our work, or any area of our life. And we have to always be very careful to separate where we can rectify a situation in an area of our control, and where our ego comes in, where we take something personal as a personal, because my lordship, my position is being threatened by this somebody not acting according to my wish or desire. So that's something very subtle, and something we have to be very careful of and analyze. So I apologize. Once you start speaking on Bhagavatam, there's so much. There's a few minutes for comments, questions. So if anyone
it's okay, Vasudev Prabhu. We squeezed in a question earlier, remember? So you did get a question in. So thanks to Hemangi. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Do we want to do the temple first before the darshan? Hare Purusha Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, he was talking about an area of control. Sometimes as devotees, we justify inappropriate anger by, it's my service to Krishna to protect this particular situation, and therefore I will get my false ego involved with it and act in a very self-righteous and arrogant and offensive way. So you're right. The anger is, in the Buddhist tradition, it says anger is like holding a knife that has no handle, that it actually is something that is harmful to ourselves. just like fire. You can cook with it, you can heat the house with it, or you can burn the house down. So Srila Prabhupada, you mentioned, would exhibit anger, but it was theatrical. It's not that he was in uncontrolled anger. Those are the gates to hell: lust, anger, and greed. So even in the realm of devotional service, you might justify some burst of harshness that's really not pleasing Krishna, because it's based on some selfish or false ego motivation rather than purely devotional.
Yeah. Yeah, anger is also often rooted in dissatisfaction. Because it's very clear, especially on book distribution, and I'm sure Adi Prabhu, you have that experience as well. Sometimes you just approach someone and there's like anger comes out, and it's not actually because of you approach them, it's just because they're dissatisfied. So that principle holds true for so many situations. Like often our anger comes because we have some other frustration going on in our lives, something else is there, we're just not feeling very satisfied, and then we're more prone to fall prey to anger.
While we wait for Adi Prabhu to give us darshan, a follow-up question to that, Vasudeva Prabhu, is how do we mitigate that? Like, how do we realize when the anger is like righteous, that needs to be there if somebody is like getting hurt or whatever, and when it is ego-driven?
That's a very good question.
Oh, actually, it looks like we might not get darshan, so it looks like he's walking away.
Yeah, our ego is so pervasive, at least I can speak to myself, that when it's we need to have a sense of control over our anger. So and that often comes by just stepping back from it. Yeah, when we see like, okay, I can use this anger, like, but I'm not controlled by it. That is where that's where the difference lies. We have to look at it from some objective way. We cannot be just overcome by that emotion. So, and then only from that platform we can use it in some productive way.
Hare Krishna, good point. That actually there's love behind that. I've seen Prabhupada ferociously chastise, raise his voice, and terrify us with the way he would speak so powerfully. But there was because of love. The motivation was this: will this please Krishna? Will this help this person? Not because I don't like it, So it has to have a lot of love for somebody or to chastise them.
Yeah. Thank you, Adi Prabhu, for sharing that. It's always so wonderful to hear from someone that actually personally witnessed that. There's some power to that.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments, reflections? You can either raise your virtual hand, unmute yourself. Jeffrey?
Hare Krishna.
Hare
I
Krishna.
just wanted to say thank you very much for the points this morning about anger and the causes or the frequent causes of anger, and it just resonated very much for me this week and this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for a practical, if we struggle with anger, I definitely, it's like an emotion I struggle with. Different personality types have different faults. Let's say it can be lust, can be anger, it can be envy. So yeah, I mean, I struggle with all of them. But specifically for anger, Prabhupada says somewhere, and this was told to me by Jayadvaita Swami, that you can pray to Lord Nrsimhadev, who is the complete manifestation of anger. There's no more angry person than Lord. He's the supreme angry person. Supreme angry personality of Godhead. But it's purely out of love. His anger is purely motivated by love for Prahlad, to protect his devotee. But we can pray to Lord Nrsimhadev to overcome anger and to purify our anger.
That's a very good point. The other thing I was thinking is when we talk about anger, or we conceive of anger, a lot of times maybe it's our nature to expand it to this, Nrsimhadev style of explosive anger. But there's these points throughout the day, especially with work or kind of mundane activities, where there's these constant micro failings. Oh, that didn't work out. Like just things like, oh, my computer locked up or stuff like that. And it's just these constant little things that dissatisfy us throughout the workday or whatever.
Yeah.
And those build up to like by 5 o'clock, you're like, oh, I got to get out of here,
Yeah.
And that type of anger, managing that as it arises in those micro moments throughout the day is really what balances us. It's not this getting back from some explosive anger. It's not even getting to that, because you have to manage it in these little moments throughout your life. And the prayers to whomever helps to assuage that lust that's drawing that anger into you is really kind of a beautiful way to kind of carry yourself through the day with those prayers in your mind. Thank you.
That's a very good point about praying, because Krishna is so wonderful. He will show us. And so many analogies are there, like a surgeon. He uses a scalpel and he's cutting open somebody's chest to do heart surgery. But it's not anybody grabs a knife and starts slashing away. There's training, and there's actually Krishna's loving hand guiding us. We feel the urge to speak, the urge to speak, the mind's demand, the pushings of anger, tongue, belly, genitals. We feel the urge, and then we turn to Krishna and say, Lord, if you like, we're going to give a good blast here, or if you like, we'll be silent and wait and see what will happen. Krishna will show us.
Thank you so much. And Vasudev Prabhu, thank you so much for continuing to answer our questions and sharing and the insights that come up. And thank you to everyone who wrote in the chat. We don't want to take too much longer because we know that people need to get to work. I'm one of those people. And we don't want to take up more of your precious time. But thank you so much, Vasudev Prabhu, and everyone who participated in class. Thank you to, again, Adi Purusha Prabhu for giving us the beginning songs to start our day. Thank you also to Ananda Bihari Prabhu, who, even though he's on a retreat at New Vrindavan, is so serious about his devotional service that he will make sure that we're all signed into Zoom and getting us on live stream. So thank you so much to everyone that makes this Bhakti Center Srimad Bhagavatam class family possible. So Hare Krishna, everyone. We hope to see you tomorrow. We love you all.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bo.